It's great to see so many of you here. Thanks for joining me. I think I'll set off. So look, this session is about arranging, and I use the term in inverted commas because I don't really talk about making arrangements. I talk about reconstructing my tunes. Arrangements to me seems to suggest that it's a bit arbitrary. I can do anything I want, and I'm operating in a much narrower framework for myself. I'm trying to reconstruct something older, albeit that's of course hopelessly impossible, and I should just give up right now and just go for a walk. We can't possibly reconstruct older music and have any kind of certainty that what we're doing is plausible. But that's the impossible goal I set for myself. So I just like to try and, fail better and better, hopefully, if there's any way of establishing how I'm doing. So this is about arranging old Irish harp melodies along historical lines. So let me see. I'll start sharing my screen with you. There are a few things I want to show you. So can you all see the screen? Is that, can you all see the image? Okay, thank you very much. So this is one of the oldest harp compositions that was captured in the 1790s by Edward Bunting from the playing of Denis O'Hampsey, one of the oldest harpers who was at the gathering of 10 Irish harpers and one Welsh harper in Belfast in July 1792. So at the top we see John Scott's Lamentation, or Cooa, Cooad maybe. And of course Bunting didn't speak Irish, so this is his way of writing down the word Cooa, Cumha. A Cooa is a lament. So John Scott's Lamentation. John Scott comes from a dynasty of harpers who were active in the early 17th century and probably late 16th century. We don't know if they're just the same family, if they're brothers. There's John. They're from Westmeath, over towards the west of Ireland, according to Bunting. And John and Harry Scott, he says, are brothers. But there's also a Ned Scott, Eamon Albanoch, who is harper to a colonial administrator in Ireland, Lord Chichester. And there is Darby Scott, of whom there's a very famous painting at the Danish court of Christian IV in the 1620s in Copenhagen. So it could be that they're all brothers, or they're at least from the same family. So here we have John Scott's Lamentation, and it's for the Baron of Lochmoe. And Lochmoe is not too far away from me here. It's about less than an hour's drive from Kilkenny to the west in Tipperary. And it's outside. It's not too far from Thurles, which is one of the big towns in Tipperary. And the Baron of Lochmoe is Thomas Purcell. So he's an Old English baron, and by Old English I mean he's a descendant of the French-speaking people who invaded Ireland at the end of the 12th century in 1169 and forward. And of course, like all the waves of invaders who come to Ireland, they wind up being more Irish than the Irish. But you can tell from his name, Purcell, that he's coming from a French background. So this is a lament for Thomas Purcell, the Baron of Lochmoe. Sorry, maybe I should put some of these titles in the chat. So Lochmoe is the name of the place. It's now called Lochmore, and it's in County Tipperary. And the person in question is Thomas Purcell. Now, the reason I want to show you this piece is because it's supposedly from 1599, but actually Thomas Purcell doesn't die until the first few years of the 17th century. But it's clearly from, it may be from around this period, around 1600, and that makes it of great interest to us because of its antiquity. It's a very esoteric, strange, unusual piece. I play it in the festival concerts that I'm playing in this year, so you can hear it. But you can also go to Bandcamp and hear another version. If you go to siobhanarmstrong.bandcamp.com, you can hear another version for free. And the reason that it's one of the many reasons that it's interesting is, of course, it's a field transcription, so it's as close as we can get to the harper. Edward Bunting made 2 attempts to write this down. This is the first attempt. He wasn't very successful. It was a very tricky piece to note. He tried to notate it in 3/4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You can see it's problematic already there. And the harper said to him, don't forget common time. 1, 2, 3, 4 is the cut, says Dirty Dot. So I think Dirty Dot is a bunting nickname for O'Hampsey. So I've reconstructed this in various ways over the years on my 16th century music recording. I think I recorded it in a triple time. I now think it's a duple time. I want to take O'Hampsey much more seriously. But you can see here that we have more than the melody. Do you see we have extra notes? We have B, B, A, A, G, G. We have a G, D, G. Oh, sorry, a B, D, G underneath the tune. We have these notes. We have a little E here, which is in a lower register to the rest of the tune with a B written beside it. B for bass. Bunting tends to notate these notes that are in a lower register by putting B for bass. Here's another one, B for bass attached to a B. Here's the two ledger lines of what might be A, but he doesn't write a note, and later he pencils in a G. Here's another one, probably a G. Look at this EB. So this is one of the earliest pieces that gives us some indication. Here's the interval of a fifth of what might be going on. Here in a gap in the treble, we have a lower register passage. The similar thing here, we have this ascending passage in the melody, and then we have a lower register passage where the melody doesn't look very active. And towards the end, we can see more octaves, and we can see descending octaves towards the end. I'm just going to check my phone in case anybody has any problems. Okay, that's fine. So this is the earliest piece I wanted to show you, and I want to play you a sound file of it so that you can have a listen. Where's the sound file? Actually, I can't see a sound file of that. Let me just play it to you. So feel free to look at the screen rather than at the harp, but I'll just point it at the harp anyway. And watch out for all the lower register notes. So what do we think about that kind of piece and what kind of textures we're hearing? If you can unmute yourself, or maybe tell me in the chat, what sort of things are we not hearing in this piece that we would normally hear? If you think of the average harp piece that you would hear and compare it with that, what's absent and what's different about this idiom and style compared to the usual kind of thing that we hear? So I wonder if anybody could give us there's no rigid tempo. Yeah, I suppose that's I don't know whether that's true or not. It's certainly how I'm playing it, Janet, is with the no rigid tempo. And that's because I think that piece, I think the reason Bunting had trouble putting it in 3 and O'Hamsey kept on saying it was in 4 was that, in fact, I think you're onto something there. There's something about the rhythm and the pulse that we're not getting, or that was quite difficult at the time. Yeah, tempo, exactly. The dreamy pulse again, I mean, that might be me, because Bunting, I think, says that this is quite fast, or maybe even presto. But presto in 3 would be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, bum, 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 ba, ba, bum. So it actually works out not as fast as people might imagine. Presto might be a little bit faster than that. But also I'm thinking it's a lament, so I am trying to get some sort of feeling into it, for better or worse. I don't know if that's anachronistic or not. There's not a lot going on in the bass, says Barbara. Thank you very much. There is not a lot going on in the bass. So we're not getting a separate bass line. We're not getting a we do get some continuity between the hands, but it's not separate. There's a kind of the continuity is running along in the same way as the treble is. It's in parallel to it, isn't it? So Kerry says harmonic drive and core. Tell us more, Kerry, about what you mean by that. You mean there is no harmonic drive and core, or do you see a harmonic drive and a core?
No, I'm talking about it's not being there.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's no, we're used to music, certainly from the 16th century onwards, we're used to the music being bass orientated, that we have a firm foundation and then we have music on top of it. And of course in the 17th and 18th century we get to the stage where we have the bass is king. You know, you're improvising over a bass, you're given the bass line, and you know everything else is sort of an added extra in terms of accompaniment. And even for compositional style, you have people just improvising over the bass. In this music it seems to be exactly the opposite way around. Which is perhaps an older medieval idea that the tune is king. And we still see that in modern Gaelic music, and we see it in many musics across the world, where the tune is the important thing and harmony is not so important. So thank you for those contributions. So we can see this echoing at the octave. Let's have a look back again. We see this echoing here. We see it here, towards the beginnings and ends. What else can we see in this piece? So we've got the octave mirroring, we've got no harmony. Where these other notes, we have these single lower register notes, this E and this B and this note. What can you tell me about these? I see a characteristic common to the positioning of these in the tune and what is or isn't happening when we hear those notes. Could anybody articulate what that is? They're in the gaps. Yeah, there's not a whole lot going on over them. So you have a gap here and then the notes. You play to here, then you have something here. Now, it doesn't mean that there's silence. I'm sure you could hear when I was playing. There isn't silence above because the instrument is so resonant that certainly we hear something going on, but there's no activity. There's no particular activity happening in the treble hand as we hear that. So these notes are happening in the gaps. I think this top line is very interesting, and I want to play it to you again. And maybe don't look so much at the page as listen to the lower register and tell me if you could articulate anything else about any characteristic of the lower register once it gets going. Tell me about that lower register. If you had to describe it to somebody who couldn't hear that, how would you describe it to them?
Moves as a scale.
Yeah, there's a line. It's linear. So we go B, A, G, F, E, D, B, A, and presumably G. It's penciled in, that G, so we don't know. But I think it's a fair bet that there was a G there. So we have the lower register building a line of its own. And what would we say about the treble? Let me play it again. So we've got this line going in the lower register. Listen to the treble this time. Can you describe that? Can you describe the tune or the melody that you hear? Do you hear a tune or melody?
I feel like it's one melodic piece divided into two hands.
So
it's not being thought of as a piece with a melody and any kind of harmony. It is one world being shared.
Exactly. It's one world, but let's hear that. So that's our start. It's one world, exactly. Now let's try to analyze the two bits of that world. So we have here they're absolutely in tandem, and we're still carrying on with the tune here, and then we have this. Now let's have a listen from here. We have yabba dabba, nothing. This little thing. So are we hearing equal amounts of melody between the hands, or does one hand have more intent and is one hand more decorative, or are they broadly equal? So let's have a listen again with those questions in mind. And I'm playing these ones faster, this yada da da da. And I can't remember why I'm doing that. It might be to do with the second draft. Maybe they're notated faster in the second draft, that could be. So I'm playing them differently to here. So what do you think?
In one analytic sense, it's just a descending G major scale.
Yeah.
And you have two hands decorating it.
Yes. Okay, but are they both decorative? Is one more functional and is one more decorative?
There is a dominant hand that's doing the heavier lifting.
Okay, which hand is that?
The upper hand.
Oh, you think the upper hand's doing the heavy lifting? Okay. So let me play it again in a duple. Remember, I think it's in a duple rhythm. And let's see where the beats occur. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Sorry, I should be counting to 4. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I admit I'm biasing that towards duple, but the reason for my bias is the comment on the bottom of the manuscript page. Don't forget common time. So which notes are on the beats, and which hand is on the beat and which hand is off the beat?
Bass is on.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that that's the more functional part, and that the upper parts are on off beats rather than downbeats. But Kerry, do you find that convincing or not, what I just said?
I think it's just two different perspectives. I see the upper hand as providing the impetus to the landing on what the lower hand is doing.
Oh, very good. Yeah, exactly. I don't disagree with you for a second. That's a lovely way of articulating. So you have pum, 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 then you have yada, tum, yum, pum, yabba, tum, pa-dum, pa-dum. Exactly. The treble hand pushes us into those strong beats. Exactly. But I still see the lower ones as the foundation, and I see the upper ones as those sort of ornamental pushes into it. So I don't think we disagree particularly. Let me check the chat in case anybody's saying. I think it's yep, very good. All right, so that's the first thing. That's the first piece I wanted to show you. Let me see if there was anything else I wanted to tell you about that. So yeah, no harmony, octave mirroring. The lower register shows up in gaps in the treble, and that lower register was sort of building this linear line of its own. And those upper notes are leading us to those lower notes. So let's have a look at a different piece. Okay, so here's a piece again that was notated from O'Hampsey, but now we're not looking at a field transcription. Here we're looking at the next step forward for Bunting, which is piano arrangement. So you can see it's much neater. I mean, he's still fiddling around, he's still crossing things out and doing things, but it's a much neater arrangement. And the very interesting thing about this piece, Táim mo cholas ná dúisigh mé, I am asleep and don't waken me, is that at the bottom of it, he has some text. I don't know if you can see that text very clearly, or if you can see it clearly enough to tell us what you think it says. So it says, this setting is exactly copied from Hempson, both bass and treble. Brilliant, my job here is done, surely. This is fantastic. This is exactly what we've always wanted to see. If we wanted to know what the lower hand was doing, he says, this is it. So let's see if it is it. I see the first problem, and the reason I can't play it for you in F is why? Why can't I play it for you in F on my harp? Seems like just one little flat should be no problem. So what's the problem with F? Does anybody know? Does anybody know what the two traditional tunings were on an early Irish harp that the harpers told Bunting at the 18th? Yeah.
F sharps.
Thank you. Yeah, there were two possibilities. You could be tuned G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Or you could be tuned G, A, B, C, D, E, F natural, G. Nowhere did they have the possibility of a B flat. So already we're a little bit suspicious of Bunting, because this can't be exactly as O'Hampsey played it, because it's in F, and O'Hampsey for sure wasn't playing it in F. But let's have a little look at it. Let's see if I can transpose it up. I'll play it in G. I think actually this is the moment where I realise I don't have F naturals, which I need for this piece. Just hang on a second. Okay, it'll do. Good enough. So let me carry on from these double bar lines here. And so on, and it just it goes down the octave, and so on. So bearing in mind what we've just seen in Cool Queen and Albanig in one of these old pieces, and many of you have been at some of my sessions already this week, so you'll have a good idea already of what I think is plausible and what is not plausible. What do we find plausible and implausible about this piano arrangement? How much of it do we think is really O'Hampsey and how much not? So let's have a look. Could the harp not have been tuned to the organ Bunting he played, and so when he heard and picked out the organ was F while Hempson was playing? Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think Hempson was playing in G, but I think maybe for keyboard purposes and for variety, Jacqueline, I think that's why he might have written it in F.
No, I was just wondering if, the harpers didn't have tuners. So right. Could O'Hampsey have been tuned in C, but the organ is always in the same tuning. So the same note would have come up in F, in the key of F.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And there is a case that there is an argument to be made that Bunting had perfect pitch, because most of his field transcriptions you can see that, you know, the home note will be G or D or something that fits in a tuning with an F natural or an F sharp. But there are a whole bunch of tunes he notates in A, which would require 3 sharps. The harpers weren't playing in 3 sharps, but it arises a lot with Patrick Quinn, the harper in Armagh. And so what I'm thinking there is that Patrick Quinn had his harp tuned quite high, and so Bunting, with his perfect pitch, was thinking that he was playing in A. But for him, he was playing in G, but his harp was just tuned high. So that's a possibility. So let's have a look at this again. And okay, Janet's saying the Santiphony stuff's definitely of the period, but perhaps how Bunting transcribed it showed his own piano bias. Oh, undoubtedly, Janet. And how? But I can see, do we see here, we have things like G, G, G going to F, F, F. We have D, D, C, C, D, D, F, F. So do you see the paralleling at the octave, which is very unpianistic? And so I find that very plausible. I think he's actually channeling somehow what he heard. Notice how this D is in the gap after this D. Pom. That's what we saw in Cúig Queen and Albanig. We saw these lower register notes in gaps. Have a look at this. Pom. E flat, E flat. Yabba D, D. Yabba C, C. It looks entirely plausible to me. So you have a long note in the treble. It's echoed in the other register. Now, whether the harper played one note or whether he played an octave in his other hand, I don't know. But how about when we get here, when we get to these passages with the repeated notes? What do we think of that? Plausible? Not so plausible? Barbara's grinning away. Barbara doesn't find this remotely plausible. I must say I don't find it very plausible either. It feels very pianistic to have these repeated triads. And I can see that on a forte piano or a square piano of the period, they're not very resonant instruments and you do have to restrike a lot. But on our harps, of course, we don't. So this frenetic restriking, I don't find that somehow very plausible. But here again, we have octaves, F, F, D, D, C, C, the same thing, echoed at the octave in a gap. We have more octaves here, D, D, C, C, D, D, F, and so on. So I find this quite plausible in so many ways. I think Bunting is trying hard to give us a sense of what O'Hampsey was doing, but he is compromised by the fact that he's preparing this for a piano publication. So fortunately, there's actually a field transcription of this piece. So let me share this with you. Here we go. Oops, it's too big. Let me make it smaller. Oops, not that small. Okay, here we go. So, here we are on 4 lines. He says something about cruel purty, almost as, and I always forget what this word is. Does anybody remember what this word is on this page? Because I've spent a lifetime of forgetting. I can't remember if it's miss or what it is. So, cruel purty is a nickname that Bunting has for O'Hampsey. So let's look at this. So now we're back to the scribbled one line that he's taking out in the field. We can see the tune. G, G, D, E, G, G. Oh, here's a B. G, A. Another, he says B for bass. G, A, B, B, A, G, E. Rest. D, E, G with a B. G, B, D, E, D, B, A. G, B, A, G, G. There's the first half of the tune. He gives us the bar numbers above it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These T's, by the way, are to indicate ornaments. Bunting uses 3 symbols for ornaments. A T with a hook on the bottom. A cross, like this one. He has sometimes a cross with a hook on the bottom, so it actually looks like a T, which it should, because it means T for trill. And so he also uses TR. also trilo, trill. And I can't tell you what the differences are, if there are any differences. That's a whole other subject. I'm strongly thinking I might do something on ornamentation and bunting ornamentation next year as a workshop, because it's a very interesting subject to me. But just if you're looking at the manuscripts, this is these T's are just I always joke it just means T for twiddle. It just means do some kind of ornament, because ornaments have always been, I think there's a reason that composers sometimes don't write out ornaments and they use symbols. They're deliberately and necessarily ambiguous to give you some to give us some freedom about the execution of those passages. So that's our first half. Now, do you remember the second half where we had in the gap we had these we had this lower register stuff? Here's the evidence. Ya da dum pom B. Ya ba da dum pom. Ya ba da dum pom. Yada dee da dum. That's where we had all those repeated triads in the piano arrangement. Yada dum dee da da dum. No evidence of that here, of course. Yada dee da dum dee da 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 dum. Yada dum pom. Yada da dum. So we're seeing time and again echoing at the octave in gaps. Then we get to the bit where it's an octave down. And you could say, oh, well, there's no longer an octave. It's ya-da-dum, bass, ya-da-da-dum, bass in the same register. But do you think that's plausible? Or what would you do when you get to that section? Because I don't play that in the same octave. No, Marianne is shaking her head. Marianne, you don't believe it's in the same octave either. Why not? Tell us.
It doesn't feel right.
But why doesn't it feel right? What's the context that you now have that makes you say this doesn't feel right?
Because he often, when he repeats a note, puts the second one in the bass.
Yeah, exactly. And we've had this very passage, D, E, F, 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 G, F, E. We've had it up here, D, E, F, 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 G, F, E. So he knows the shtick. He's telling it to himself. So he doesn't bother to put an octave down. But there's also a very practical reason why he doesn't put it an octave down. What's the practical reason? Remember, he's writing at speed. Marianne.
Has to write ledger lines.
He'd have to write just a mountain of ledger lines.
Stave.
Lots and lots of ledger lines to indicate the low F. And then it would be getting in the way of the next stave. So, if space is at a premium, you try and keep things on the stave. Hence, why we have all those clefs in medieval and Renaissance music. You're desperately trying to keep things on the stave. So for sure he means what we had up here. Ya-da-dum, pom, ya-ba-da-dum. His reminder to himself is just the little B symbol, and so on. So let's see. I want you to hear a sound file of... Well, actually, let's keep sharing that with you so you can see that page. No, I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I want to show you my edition of it so you can see a sort of cleaned up version, especially for anybody who's having trouble reading any of that stuff. Let's get rid of the thumbnail. Okay, let's make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to share my own edition of this with you, and then I'm going to let you hear a sound file of it so you can see the kind of reconstruction I'm making of this kind of thing and where it's coming from now that we've seen the manuscript page. So there we are, and let me get the sound file going. I think I do a repeat, so you'll have to listen to the first section twice. I'm going to stop that because I'm not convinced that can you hear this very well? I'm not convinced I've actually...
It's very quiet.
Yeah, sorry. I haven't shared my computer sound. Sorry, so let me just do that again. Is that better? I'm also worried that I wasn't actually sharing my edition with you. Can you see my edition? Oh, you can. Okay, but isn't it supposed to have a sort of a green frame, and it doesn't? So I don't really understand. But good, if you're seeing it, that's terrific. So you can see the sort of thing I do. It's really conservative, and it's coming out of any evidence I can find in the field transcription, and it's really always the same kind of thing. I'm mirroring at the octave. I'm putting things in gaps. Now here, I don't know if I would really, if that should be an octave F in the lower hand or just one F, and if in that case should it be the higher one or the lower one. I'm not sure. I'm also not sure about the speed of this piece. I think I was trying to channel the title, which is I'm Asleep and Don't Wake Me, but I'm not really convinced. I think Bunting gives a much faster tempo marking somewhere, so maybe it's just a bit too lugubrious and I'm playing it too slowly. Can't really tell. These things change. All right, so let's talk about the tonal. There's just a little thing I want to tell you about the tonal areas that the harpers favoured, and I want to read you a Bunting quote, which is a really intriguing quote to me. So Bunting says in his 1840 volume, when he's talking in his introduction about how the harpers played and he's describing it, he says, "It does not appear that the later Irish harpers were acquainted with the terms major or minor, or their application, but they were well apprised of the importance of the harmony attached to the tone of E and its minor concord, as appears from the frequent use they made of it, this tone ranking in their estimation next to the keynote or tonic." Okay, so there's this thing about E and minor and the tonic. So let's explore that a little bit. So when Bunting refers to, he also talks about it in other places, and he talks about the submediant. So what you need to know is that the home tone in any key is the tonic, or let's call it 1. So if we in an 8-note scale, if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you can build harmonies, of course, on each note of that scale. So if we're in a G harmony, we can build a chord on G, a chord on A, the chord of 2, the chord of 3, the chord of 4, 5. Ya da da. Pretend I have an F sharp, 5, 6, 7, and all the rest of it. You can build a triad on each one. Now, I have a bit of a bugbear about because in my own playing for years when I was younger, I used functional harmony. So I would use a lot of the chords which are most common and most functional in European harmony, which is anything based on the chord of 1. So that would be, actually I'm going to tune in an F sharp again just because I'm thinking in G at the moment. So I would often do 1, and the next most important chord is 5, which is D and G. So you'd have lots of 1, 5, 1. We're all familiar with that. And the next most important one is the chord of 4, C. So 1 is called the tonic, 5 is called the dominant, and 4 is called the subdominant. And I used a lot of that harmony, and I still hear people using a lot of that harmony. But bearing Bunting's quote in mind where he says, well, yeah, they didn't really get major and minor, but they kept on using this E minor chord. And you think, okay, what position in that is that in G? So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's the 6th chord in G, or the submediant. And he says in other places, you know, they really worked with the submediant. So why is this relevant to us? Well, because when we're arranging our tunes, and for example, we're in G, and I'm thinking here, for example, of Tuairdam the Love, Dá Mihi Manam, this tune, yeah, Janet's nodding her head. We all know this tune well, and for years I played. So the chord of 4, C, chord of 1. But what he's saying is that instead of that 4, they tend to go for 6. Wow, that gives the music a completely different flavour. And Bunting could hear this because he and we have similar kind of ears. We're used to functional harmony in the modern world. So he was very used to building cadences and hearing the chord of 4. So when he heard things like this sort of bare kind of texture, that really struck him. And I think that's why he made that remark. So I want to show you some examples of where I think this happens. And actually, I've only just really started to collect examples of this. So you might find far more. And if you do, send them to me. And I might find far more. And we'll put together a bigger list at some point. But here's the Lady of the Desert. So it's G. It's all G-ish. Then we get to this E, this note that we will always want to harmonise in our tunes. We'll get to the 6th note of the scale. So in G it's E. If your tunes are in C, that 6th note is going to be A. So watch out for the A's in C-ish tunes, and watch out for the E's in G-ish tunes. So really, Bunting and you and I were all expecting a chord of 4, C underneath it, maybe going to 1. But that's not what we get. And by the way, sorry, this is very tricky to read. It goes F, F, E, D, E. Oh, look, there's actually something lower down. So we might have, so we just have an E on its own, and instead of it being accompanied by a C major chord, it goes E, E, B. Ah, there we are. There's that 6 thing. And so on. He does it again in the same in the next line again. I'll play you from the beginning of this line. There we are. But no, it goes. Isn't that it's quite shocking to the ear. Janet, I'm really curious because your face is so expressive. I want to know what you're thinking about this.
I get it. I'm thinking all of my misdeeds.
What did you say? I missed that?
I'm thinking of all of my misdeeds.
Well, no, but they're not misdeeds. It's just it's a different, more modern way of doing it. Look, I did this for years. I harmonized everything, with G and D and C. And it took me years to even get my ear out of it. And even now I have these running mock battles with people I coach, who shall remain nameless, who are professional harpists. And, they'll make a reconstruction of something and we'll work on it and I'll criticize it. And they, one of them will, some of them will go, oh, I put the subdominant in, I put the courtesy in, you're not going to like it. And I go, yeah, it doesn't, it really, the longer I live, the less idiomatic that feels. It's too sweet, So here's another example. And I can't remember if it's the tune that Sylvia's working on today or if she's working on it another day. It's Kathleen Scoil. So another G-ish thing. It would have been in the old days for me. I would put in a C chord there. But clearly, if you have a look here, do you see the B for bass? So from the notes before it goes G, A, B, G, E, E. Wow. Not C. I think I had one other example I wanted to show you. Oh yeah, now this one isn't a field transcription, so I'm being a bit naughty because I like to only work for field transcriptions. But nor is it a piano arrangement. I think it's the next draft up. I find it still fairly plausible. It's one of the pages of Eleanor Ruin, the divisions that the divisions that O'Hampsey played on Eileen Ruin, possibly composed by Cornelius Lyons, I think. So what did I want to show you on this page? Oh yeah, here it is. So we start into the tune, into the second part of the tune. It goes C, and it's a tune in G. So you'd expect C C, but instead you get G G, much more ambiguous, and so on. Now I'm not sure that's a wildly good example to show you, but I haven't gathered many examples of this yet, so I'll probably come up with better examples. But also there's a counter argument to what I'm saying, which I feel duty bound to present to you. And the counter argument would be things like, let me open up this, no, not that one. Hang on a second. Right. So here's a great big fat C chord. So this is, again, Cornelius Lyons, so a very Baroque composer, and this is one of his variations on Colleen Yvach Shorsha, Girls Have You Seen George? And so it starts on this line. I'll just talk you through it first. So there's a tune, and then it winds up being the only big sort of chord I've ever seen in early Irish harping. Followed, by the way, by this, which is a glissando. And Maria Cleary tells me she thinks, when I showed this to her a few years ago, she said, "Oh, I think that's the first manuscript harp glissando anywhere." I said, "No, surely not. I mean, French pedal harp music is full of glissandos." She went, "Yeah, but they're all printed in the 18th century. But this is 1792 and it's in a manuscript." So that's just a fun little side trip, is that's there's an unusual harp glissando notated. So again, this is a G-ish piece. It starts off sort of E up here, E, B. So it's an E-ish thing. But then it settles into a fat C. So there's an example of the very chord that I keep telling you I'm not interested in is being used. So, and another piece of...
Was there a modulation in there? Was that a transitional C?
No, because it's just in G. So it goes in the C, and then there's a big glissando, and it goes back to G. So no modulation, but I mean, you get points for thinking that might be the case. Here's an, and the other. Sorry, carry on.
Surely there was some European influence when they did that.
Yeah, but I suppose I'm always trying to establish how much do we are we allowed to use this chord of 4 and how much not, and it seems much less than we would think, you know. But here, look, here's a Carolyn jig, the jig to Miss Dillon, and I think you can definitely see in Carolyn that he's thinking of this as a harmonic thing. I think I need F naturals to play you this. Sorry, just a second. And I think this is a really interesting example that is inarguably the chord of 4 used quite substantially. So let me see from the beginning. It's here. Okay, now we're on the second line. Now, do you see this part where the 32nd notes are? It goes, and then into the bass E, C. And then it goes F, which is the chord of 4 and C. And then it surely goes to the dominant and the tonic. I'll play it for you again. So a chord of 1, 4, 5, 1, maybe. I mean, I think about cadences all the time. I never really know if they're 5-1, 7-1, what they're likely to be. But I just wanted to give you a counter argument in the interests of balance. We're very much up against the clock, but again, I wanted to show you that Tuair them the law of Give Me Your Hand, or it's generally known in sources by its Latin title, Da Mihi Manum. I wanted to show you an early source for this, the earliest source I've come across for this, which is from about 1643 to 44 in the handmade lute book made by Lady Margaret Weems, who was a teenager in Scotland who was playing the lute. And so she copied this into her book, so it's in tablature. So don't worry, we're not going to learn to read tablature in 30 seconds, but just to know that the lines are not the stave, it's not the music stave that we've seen elsewhere, it's the strings of the lute. And the letters show you where to put your fingers on the fretboard. So A, for example, is an open string. This is actually what looks like an R is the letter C, and that's the second fret down. So it goes A, B, C, D. They're just playing along the frets. So this is our ya da da dum, dee dee da da dum. It's the thing I just played you. So do you want to hear what it sounds like? Do you want to hear what that lower register is from 1643? So it's this. I'll play it. That's really D, F, 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 but I'm going to play it in G. So it'll be D, E, G, G, G. And here's the lower register that she had. And so on. So it's a drone. It's just plain old G. We don't even get the chord of 6. We're getting a drone. So let me show you a transcription of that. Just in case your lute tablature skills aren't exactly up to par today. So there we have it. So it's in F. So you just have an F as your home tone underneath the whole thing. So again, I'll play it for you again. The neighbouring note, wow, that's it, about as good as it's going to get. So do you see how little is going on in these even Renaissance lute sources of Gaelic tunes, where she had all sorts of things at her disposal? Yes, question.
It's almost demanding. Do we know enough about the context of the tablature to know if this is directed to a skilled lutenist or is it out for someone who just
I'm sorry, I'm not quite picking up what you're saying. Can you just please say that again?
Right. Do we know enough about the context of this tablature to know whether it was intended for a neophyte and therefore simplified, or for
Yes, there's always that question. Was it the fact that she was a learner because she was 13 when she started this notebook? So it could be that there's always that question, and I think it's a pretty legitimate question. But from looking at other manuscripts, for example, Strelach, which is from actually that manuscript is lost, but there's a 19th century copy of it, and we look at the Gaelic tunes in there, it's exactly the same thing. And again, you could say, well, maybe it's neophyte stuff, but so you have the same thing. You have this, in fact, it's more like bunting. You have this mirroring at the octave. It's very much like bunting. And the interesting thing with that manuscript is that the French and English lute music, which is around it, is not like that. It's standard 16th, 17th century lute music of the kind we would expect. It's Gautier and Dowland and all of these people with normal counterpoint bass lines, inner voices. And the Gaelic material is in contrast to that. It lacks the harmony and it has these parallel octaves. So I find that quite a convincing argument that this is a different kind of style and that it's not just for a neophyte. But I love the question. I think it's a really legitimate question.
But the answer is also quite convincing.
Oh, great. Super duper. I mean, I need to do more work on the Scottish lute manuscripts because I haven't. Well, no, I suppose I have looked at the European music, and it's standard. It's what we expect of European lute music. There's no strangeness. There's no difference going on. But I think it's a question well worth raising. So thank you.
But that also implies that there was a European understanding of the exotic literature. And you take this stuff as it is intended to be, and you don't modify it.
Isn't that an interesting point you raise? Yeah. That so you wonder what was the transmission? Were they hearing it directly from harpers, and therefore they saw that it was worthy of being treated with respect in its own right? Yeah, the question, it's so, I mean, Scotland is really interesting because they have the two parallel cultures going on, because of course you have French queens moving to Scotland, and you have viols and lutes and harpsichord. Well, of course you have them in the cities. You have in Dublin, you have standard Renaissance instruments as well, but you have more of an overlap of culture, so that's quite interesting. So unfortunately we're kind of up against the clock. I really wanted to spend some time, but I've given you a lot of handouts, and so what I want to show you in your handout, where are we? I'll just very briefly go through it. Weems. Nope. Let me just find what I wanted to show you. Here we go. So what I wanted to do was to take a tune. Can you see? Okay, wait a minute. Let me see what you can see. Can you see this PDF of a tune that says Molly Nick Alpine at the top? Super duper. Okay, so with this, I wanted to take a tune that is sort of begging for harmony, because it's too easy to give you a tune where it's all nice and modal, and you don't feel tempted to put in so much harmony. But this is a tune that many of us play in Ireland. It's called Molly Halfpenny, and most people, of course, play it with a lot of harmony, because it seems to lend itself to that. And so I gave myself an experiment a few weeks ago, because I thought I was going to give you a version. When I looked at it, I thought, no, it's still too harmonic. I think I need to change my mind on what I do on this piece. So I wanted to talk you through it and show you that any of the lower register that I put in is coming from the tune. Second half. Now I'm sure you can all find harmonic things to do with that, but meanwhile at the far end of the spectrum, I just put an A there because it's an A-ish bar. And this bar in the melody seems to outline a G. And in the next bar, I'm doing the O'Hamsey thing of unison and then an A in the gap. Then sort of slightly channeling Cua Queen on Albanig, or also O'Hamsey in his Táime mo cholas ná dúisigh mé. So I'm creating that linear line in the lower register. And then any of you who will have seen my Carolyn talk, or who came to the Carolyn workshop, will have seen that in lots of those pieces there's an echoing in couplets of the treble. So that's what I've done here. Let's carry on very quickly. Okay, so this could be E. Or it could be, maybe I was feeling a little fruitier, C. I wonder if I would do that today. And back to A. Echo. Unison. A couplet. So where's that coming from? That's coming from the Lady of the Desert that I showed you, where you have this and you have an echo and a fourth. Now we're really very far out of time. You can carry on, you could beef it up a little bit with octaves. And then I gave you, you might even put in one of those chords that we saw in A Chailín Ní Bhacadh Sibh Seoirse. So from bar 29, let me see. You might have that kind of thing. I might play it in a lower octave, and I pulled out all the stops for the last version, and I might throw in some of these shapes that Bunting gives in his Grace's chapter. And so on, with another chord. So beefing it up slightly, but really precious little harmony. And what harmony there is has to be organic. It has to arise naturally from the melody, not stitched on to harmonize with the melody using extra pitches. So I'd just like you to bear all these issues in mind, and others. And I outline all of this further in my pre-recorded talk, and if you watch the video of the Carolyn workshop, if you couldn't get to that, that'll give you some more ideas. So I hope that gives you some new things to think about when you're reconstructing tunes yourselves. There's probably time for a question or two, and then we'll have to call a tea break. And if there are no questions, I think we'll just open it up.
The melody seems to have more importance. No cheap theatrics.
The melody seems to have
More importance. They don't use, in a way, chords are kind of cheap theatrics.
Yeah, that's a lovely way to start cheap theatrics. That's lovely. I love that way of describing it. Yeah, and you can see that these are modal tunes with gapped scales, and that's actually another thing I should really include in this talk, is that I never make harmonies with notes that aren't in the scale. If it's a gapped scale, that I don't know, it's A to A and it doesn't have a sixth note F or something or whatever, I'm not going to use that in the tune. So I like to follow the integrity of the scale or mode I'm working in. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Let me put that back up, and let's see if anybody has any questions about that reconstruction. Yeah, so it's a matter for me of analysing the tune. If I'm reconstructing something, I'm going to analyse the tune as a prelude to adding anything. So it's, as I was saying at the beginning, this outlines this triad. So I think, of course, an A is fair game. Oof! Wow. I must have pressed against something. But I had lots of interesting thoughts about this piece. There are different ways you can go. I mean, it might be very cheerful to go to this C. I couldn't decide sometimes whether I wanted sort of cheerful major chords under the fifth of the tune, or the home chord, which is minor, and it's not obvious to me from looking at this tune which of those is more plausible. So I think I went conservatively just for E. But always look out for passages where the important notes are making a line. F, E, D. Then that's a real classic case of this. And perhaps not, which I would have done years ago. I would always have accompanied myself in thirds, and now I much prefer this sort of sober taste. And there, of course, I could have gone to C again, but I thought of this echoing E, G, E, G. Of course, you have to see, if you're playing a modern harp, you have to see how much of this is going to work for you, because your lower strings aren't as resonant as mine, and that has implications. So you might want to reiterate notes or do slightly different things to accommodate that.
I have a question.
Yes.
If I wanted to be particularly adventurous and
Yes.
insert some tune between the hands, like you showed in the pre-recorded lecture, I know that here there's no source for that, but let's say I have a song or a tune from somewhere and I kind of want to harpify it back in time.
Exactly. Yes.
How would you approach that?
Well, you see, that's what I was trying to do with this Molly Alpine, because the source for this is a printed source. It's Neil, 1724 in Dublin. In fact, it's Bunting's copy. The only surviving copy of this collection is in Bunting's manuscripts. And it's the earliest collection, printed collection in Ireland of Irish tunes. I should admit to one change as well, because look, I put the sources, I said mainly Neil's collection of the most celebrated Irish tunes, and that's because I changed one note. This G, this is not in Neil. In Neil it's da da dee 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 da 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 da. It's an A. Da 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 dee 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 dee. And I changed it because this version, Bunting's version, has a G in his piano arrangement, and that's the version that's gone into the Irish tradition. And so when people sing it and when they play it, they all play it with a G. And so I've kind of kowtowed, because if I'm doing it with singers and stuff, I play with the G. I also, to be honest, I find the G more interesting, because if it goes to the A each time, because down here it does the same. Ya da da dee 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 da 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 dum da dee 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 dee. If you do that both times in that section, it's a little bit boring. So it's so lovely to go ya da 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 T, this sort of ambiguous G, and then the much more confident ya da dee da da dum dee 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 dee. So I have kind of artistic reasons for it, but I should fess up and say that is not in Neil. Okay, that's a Bunting. So Barbara, because this was, there's no field transcription, and we know it's a harper's tune because it's by William Conlon, the Sligo harper in the second half of the 17th century. I'm desperate to turn it back into a harpy thing, and so that's why I had this go at it. But tell me more about what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Siobhán, sorry to interrupt. We have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
So if that was Caroline, that's what I mean. How would you introduce the little antiphony pieces?
Well, for starters, I would start playing all the tunes that have the antiphony in them, because there are quite a few. I'm starting to work on those myself, like Rose Dillon and Jig I made myself learn this year. So I would do all of those. And then sometimes you spot it, like Mr. Connor, which is on James Ruff's beautiful album, The Gael's Honour. When he and I worked on that, you could see that there were registral differences. It's all written on one stave, but there's a huge gap. There's a bit that goes ya ba 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 ba, and you think, oh, so you start getting an eye for what could have been antiphony between the hands, but no longer is. But the gap is big enough in the melody that you think, okay, I think that's one of those. So that's how you can start building it in: is play the ones that have antiphony, and then look at the others and see if there are hints of that. And then if there are no hints, then maybe they were tunes where he didn't do antiphony, Could be. Any other questions, comments? So I've put a whole bunch of stuff in your handout, so you have that Molly Alpine to have a go at. Let me see. I've given you, what have I given you? Historical lines, handouts. So you've got a Cua Queen and Albanig edition of mine. You've got a link to a performance. You have my edition of the Táimim Chola and my edition of Molly Alpine. And what else? And NMP3. I think I've given you sound files. So you should have something to get your teeth into. Okay? And I hope that inspires you. This is all just work in progress. It's work in progress for me too. But let's just carry on this merry path if it's of interest to us, and see where it gets us. I mean, I've really changed my mind even this year about how I play this music. And even when I'm accompanying singers singing Carolyn songs now, I still have no truck with harmony. And my medieval job is to play the tune with the singer and then to do all these other things around it. So thank you very much.